Hey guys, thanks for checking out the My Career Path podcast. I have another awesome interview episode with Jerek Anderson, who has been working in the tech field for quite a while, got a degree from Boise State University in computer science. So I hope you guys enjoy this episode. I think Jerek gives some really awesome tips about being relentlessly resourceful and just making sure that you're trying new things and trying to get out of your comfort zone to really make something happen and make something of your career. So let's get into it. Hi, everybody. Welcome to the My Career Path podcast. Super excited to have Jerek Anderson with me today, one of the founders of Sherpa Technology Advisors. And I'm just excited to have you on the show. Thanks for coming on, Jerek.
Yeah, great to be on, Colton. Thanks for having me.
Of course. Yeah. We go way back to Boise when I was growing up, and you were a scout leader and just an awesome friend.
Yeah, that's right. I spent a lot of time over the years in some of those positions with scouting and working with the youth, and that was always a lot of fun. And I remember trips that you and I went on that were a lot of fun.
Yeah, it was awesome. I remember getting my Eagle Scout. You were a huge help in that, and so I've always kind of looked up to you. So I'm so excited to talk to you about your career and catch up, I guess, is kind of what we're doing.
Yeah, well, thanks. I'm really glad that you reached out and we connected because, yeah, it's always fun to talk about the past and things that have gone on and share stories.
Well, perfect. Well, let's go ahead and start with kind of some of your biggest career achievements, something that you are proud of and that you'd like to share with everybody.
Sure. I mean, and I whenever I think of achievements, I mean, it's a broad topic. The things that definitely are most worthwhile to me are, perhaps the standard ones, but family and my kids and things that we've been able to do on that side of it. But professionally, I feel like I've been really blessed and had opportunities to do a number of things. And if I had to kind of categorize that as an achievement or, a list of some of the achievements, that's kind of hard. I guess one of the things that I'm most proud of is just taking opportunities as they've come to me. And most of those that I'm most proud of looking back were perhaps the most daunting going into it, like the ones where I definitely didn't feel fully qualified and wasn't sure, how this would go. But anyway, there's a number of those that happened while I was at Clearwater Analytics. There's a number of those that have happened in other areas of my life. And then most recently, the Sherpa Technologies. And then I purchased a business too, which I'm not sure if I've talked to you about much, but that's recently happened as well.
Yeah, and I'm sure we'll kind of chat about that too. So let's kind of go through your current position right now. What are you doing right now as a job?
Yeah, so I have a few things going on. So when I left Clearwater, I first just took a couple years and kind of pursued hobbies and interests and just caught my breath, basically. It was a really nice break to have. But I started getting a little restless. And even before that 2 years was up, I had started doing some advising, mostly around technology and software. And that was kind of the genesis of Sherpa Technologies, or rather Sherpa Technology Advisors.
Which I have to interject because I have to make it known to the audience as we were trying to set up this interview, as an advisor of technology and whatnot, we can't get a camera to work with his computer.
It's true.
He's got too old of Chrome and whatnot, so he's really good at advising other people.
That's well said, Colton. That's well said. I have an easy time advising others and a hard time letting go of my ancient MacBook Pros that work so great.
Yeah,
I just don't want to give them up.
Which is awesome. I just thought that was so funny.
Yeah, that is very appropriate. But yes. So Sherpa Technology Advisors, basically, it was just a self-employment firm for myself to provide advising, and I got involved with some small business owners as well as at least one venture capital firm here locally in Boise that I've been helping and advising, and that is a ton of fun. I really like working with small, startups, small businesses, business owners. Like that's where I find a lot of enjoyment, sharing things that I've learned
Yeah.
from a software and technology standpoint. So that was the point of that, was to allow me an avenue to, help that kind of a company or startup.
What's kind of your favorite part of working with startups? Because I've done a little bit with that in the past few jobs that I've been at. Just, couple, 4 to 5 men shops that we've been just kind of helping. I really love seeing the growth and seeing how we're going to kind of adapt and change, because you just never know what's going to happen. And so what's your favorite part of kind of advising new startups or kind of people starting out in their business?
Yeah, I mean, my favorite part is just being involved with it. I got a taste for startups when I joined Clearwater because, Clearwater is very much a startup, and I joined as the first employee. So I wasn't a founder of the company, but during my whole journey, I really felt like a founder. One of the great things about my experience at Clearwater was I was given a lot of responsibility, and I think I took on that responsibility, and I viewed it as, hey, this great opportunity to help grow this company, alongside the others that were involved with that effort. And I just never, that experience is very different. It's hard to explain it to someone that's maybe only ever worked for a big corporate job or something like that. But there's so many little jobs and tasks and things that you have to take care of to get your enterprise off the ground that it's just a very different feel. And it can be overwhelming and, exhausting, but at the same time, for me at least, it was extremely invigorating. And I totally got swallowed up in that and just was all in from almost day one, and was, able to come to work every day just excited about making this mission work that we've established for ourselves. And that's the every startup has that, the founders and the small group of employees at an early age startup, they have that same kind of view and mentality and eagerness. And I really love being around that. And so, yeah, that's my favorite part of advising. There's not a specific thing, but it's just being around that. And any way I can help people grow those types of companies, that's the most fun.
Yeah, and seeing that kind of, I know what you're talking about, like that fire, like when you have that meeting of setting goals or seeing, hey, this is what we've just done, let's keep going. You kind of get, you get hyped up, you get super excited, and you're like, yeah, let's go crush it, and I just think that's something that's awesome about working in small business and working in kind of smaller teams like that. And I'm sure in advising, you get to kind of see that frequently, which I'm sure is awesome.
Yeah, I think one big difference is, because prior to that, I actually did an internship as a software developer for, a larger company. And, I had the chance to work with some top-notch people there. But if I had to pinpoint one big difference, it would be, in fact, I remember I was given a project as an intern where I had to implement something that interfaced with the Microsoft Outlook email system. And it was a very simple task. And I pretty quickly read up and identified how I could make this happen. But then I had to, I was told I had to meet with all these different groups and get sign off. And I had to write this paper for approval over here and do this over here. All the while, it was 5 minutes of work on my end, and we could have this thing working. And that experience, one example, in contrast with a startup where you're really given the ability to affect change. You're asked to do things, and you can see how they actually impact the bottom line of the company. And that, having that feedback loop and be able to see that, my actions are actually helping in these ways, I think that's where, total fulfillment comes. And I think a lot of people, I feel sad that I think there's a lot of people that have never experienced that in their career. Like they've never had been that close to the feedback loop to see, I'm contributing this to the company and I'm able to see the direct impact that this is providing the company. And I got that, from Clearwater, and it's just the best feeling. Once you have it, it's like it's hard to look back, I guess.
Well, and it gives you that kind of motivation, like you were talking about earlier. You just kind of feel pumped and excited to do something, to work and to contribute and kind of be a part of that. So I think that's great.
Yeah. And I guess, Coleman, we should add real quick. I mean, I'd be remiss to say I'm certainly a fan of small companies and startups. There are great large companies that I've worked with and worked for, and you can experience that same thing. I think it's just harder. It's harder to find it. It's a little bit harder to have that tight feedback loop, but
for sure,
it certainly exists in big companies too.
Yeah. I want to kind of go back to back when you were kind of in high school, maybe deciding on where to go to college. Do you have a college degree at all?
Yeah, I have a Bachelor of Science in Computer Science from BFU, Boise State.
Okay. Awesome. So let's go back to kind of your senior year of high school. How did you kind of decide, hey, I want to go to college? And how did you decide kind of what degree you wanted to go after?
On the second question, absolutely no clue. Not even close. No inkling. I didn't even have an idea. On the first question, I'd always just planned to attend college. I mean, it was, and I think it kind of still is to in large part, but I was just, my parents had gone to college. Like that was just always something that I had planned to do, to, in my mind, have more opportunities from a career standpoint. So I always knew I was going to go to college. I didn't have strong opinions of where, and I certainly had no clue what I wanted to study.
You aren't alone in that, I'm sure. I was in that boat. Plenty of people are kind of in that boat. So kind of in going through college, what made you decide to kind of go with the computer science degree?
I would like to say that through research and interviewing those with more experience, I came upon computer science as a good fit. In reality, I completely lucked out on how good of a fit it was. And my rationale, I'm embarrassed to describe my decision making, but it really amounted to I knew a little bit about computers. My dad had brought like an old IBM computer, like some of the early ones from work. And these were like the monochrome, tiny, like 8-inch screens, floppy disk drives, everything. And from that experience, I really enjoyed just messing around with them and mostly playing games, of course, as a teenager. Space Invaders was probably the first game that I played.
Oh, classic.
Yeah.
Awesome.
But the extent of my thought about a degree was, well, I know I like computers and I've heard that you can make good money in them. So what degree do you take to get into that? And someone told me computer science. And so I did it. And at least I started out. Had I known at that time how much math was involved, I had no clue. Why would it involve math at all? I never would have done it. I was always a decent student, but I was not great at math. And when you get done, I basically had a minor in mathematics by the time I got my computer science degree. And that's normal for a computer science degree. And I'm pretty good at math now.
Hey, that's good.
Crazy theoretical stuff, which that's beyond me, but just the calculus.
That's what computers are for.
Exactly. But calculus, the heavy math, differential equations, that kind of stuff, I had to take all that. So anyway, that's how I stumbled upon it. And looking back, now that I obviously know more about the degree and other degrees that I could have taken, I can't believe how fortunate I was. Like, that was such a perfect degree for me to satisfy my creativity, like all the things that I really enjoy and kind of excel in.
Well, that's awesome. I'm glad to hear it. I think a lot of people were and are in a similar kind of boat, just trying to decide, hey, I know college is important. I want to go get a degree, but I'm not sure what. And sometimes just kind of stumbling along, and you end up kind of finding your way, and hopefully you find something that you really like. I took a couple of computer science courses myself. I really enjoy coding in Python, starting to pick up some like C# and C++ and whatnot. But in your computer science degree, after you get your degree, what kind of job were you looking for, or what kind of job did you get out of college?
This is another kind of a funny answer, and I'm almost embarrassed to tell the truth, but my calculus was really just maximize the salary. Whatever job will pay me the highest salary, that's what I want to do. And I mean, I'm a poor college student, so I guess it makes sense. But and at the time, this would be 2002.
Mm-hmm.
So just coming off of kind of the dot-com bust, companies in Boise for sure were not really hiring. And those that were, I mean, my starting salary was $42,000, which at the time was decent, but by no means, crazy high. I mean, now
Mm-hmm.
computer science graduates are easily making in the 80s or 90s or more if you're in, a hot tech sector.
Right, in a hot sector.
Yeah,
for sure.
but even in Boise, like at Clearwater, I did a lot of hiring, and you could make 80, 90 pretty easily as an intern, or sorry, as a recent grad. I mean, from college.
Uh-huh.
So just in those, couple decades, it more than doubled. But yeah, that was my calculus. Just maximize. Obviously, I wanted to do something in the field that I had spent the last 4 to 5 years studying, but it was really just, hey, let's make some money now. I'm tired of being a poor college student.
Right. So what job was that? Was that at Clearwater?
I took an internship while I was still finishing up school with Micron Technologies here in town. And I switched to another startup that the founders of Clearwater, they'd started this other company that I jumped on board as an intern. This is all still while I was a senior, my senior year of college, finishing up, and started with that company as an intern right as the founders were selling it to another company. Long story short, that other company had a lot of issues. A number of us got laid off. It was a tiny team of like 8, and I think half of us got laid off. I was the low man on the totem pole, just started as an intern. They didn't need me.
Right.
I got laid off, but those same founders of Clearwater were just in the process of starting what became Clearwater. They didn't even have a name at the time, but they knew I was getting laid off, and so offered me a job with this new venture, which would be Clearwater. So that all happened while
Was that
I was still in school. That was my senior year of college.
Wow. Well, that's awesome. So did you have connections to these guys at Clearwater beforehand? Like, did you know them? Had you interviewed with them at all?
My connection came from a fellow student in the computer science program that was working for that company that they had sold. And he told me, hey, you ought to come work for us. And he told me a little bit about what they were doing. It sounded like a lot of fun, and it was. So, yeah, that was my connection. And started with them, and yeah.
It just worked out.
Yeah, it really did. And that kind of goes back to what I mentioned at the beginning. It was like, there's been a number of those moments in my life that I look back on and realize my willingness to kind of jump into the unknown and take on opportunities. And they don't always pan out, right? Like, it's easy to pick the ones that end up being good, but even the ones that don't turn out so well, you always learn from them. So I'm a huge fan of, and I've learned that you're almost always better off taking a chance when it seems like a reasonable opportunity, and just always optimizing and keeping the door open for all opportunities that come your way.
Yeah, and I think there's something to be said with that, just kind of having the effort and having that kind of a mindset, and seeing how you get jazzed up and hyped up about kind of small business and whatnot, seeing the progress, kind of getting the team going, and just kind of keeping that attitude of trying. It's going to work out. We're going to kind of stumble along. We're going to find the way, but hopefully it'll just kind of work out in the end. And that's what, in talking with a lot of people, is kind of what I found is people have somewhat stumbled kind of into their career path, but they end up kind of finding something that they're really good at and they enjoy.
Yeah, absolutely. And going back to your previous question of how do you figure out what to study in school, etc. I really I don't think there's no perfect answer to how to go about that. I think what you gave as an answer is a great one though, which is yeah, do some stumbling. Plan on doing some stumbling around and trying different things. I think there's a lot of things about college that could be a lot better, but one of the things that I think is great is I used to complain about generals. I'm like, why do we have to take all these generals? This geology class has
Sure, same boat.
yeah, nothing to do with computer science. This literally will not help me. I don't understand why universities require this. And there's an argument to be made. There's schools that, capitalize on that and say, yeah, we get rid of that and graduate sooner. But I discovered some really valuable things, and that is, and of course, this is by design. This is why they do it. But you're forced to you're forced to be exposed to other things that you would never have studied otherwise. And through that, I think you learn more about what you really do like and what your interests are, and it really broadens your horizons, as cliche as that sounds. Speaking of geology, that ended up being one of my all-time favorite classes that I ever took through all my years of college. And I took that because it was the easiest of the required classes that would satisfy, that requirement.
Yeah, the credit requirements.
Yeah, I went into that thinking, seriously, a class got rocked. This is going to be the most boring class that I will have taken, and it ended up fascinating me. And I can't even articulate why. It just tickled whatever part of me that I really found interesting. The more the class went on that semester. So I think trying new things, being willing to be exposed and expanding your horizons, like that's the best way to figure out what you might want to do for a career.
Yeah, well, and I had a similar experience in going through USU for my my international business degree. I took one computer science. I think it was like 1400 or something. It's just intro to computer science, and it was like so fascinating to me. It had nothing to do with business operations, supply chain, finances, accounting, and whatnot. But I'm like, man, this programming thing, this is really cool. Just building something from scratch, sending code and kind of converted. I was like, man, that was really cool. And that's something that I've kind of continued to look into in my life and whatnot, kind of as a side hobby and whatnot, just going, you know what? I enjoy learning about this. I think it's cool how they work, how they function, and how we can use them more effectively. And now that we have AI, kind of how that's changing the landscape and whatnot. So I think it's just awesome to kind of branch out, try some other things, take the class that you're like, I don't know if I'd even like that. I've never really heard of it, and see if it just tickles your fancy, because you just never know.
Yeah. Yeah, 100%. I totally agree. That's one of the things that was kind of forced upon me in college that I learned.
Yeah. So after Clearwater, is that when you kind of started to shift more into an advisory role in your career?
Yeah, I mean, throughout Clearwater, I wore a lot of different hats. So, I started out as an intern. My first task was literally like there's a lot of funny stories I could tell about that, but first day basically.
We'll get to those.
Yeah,
we'll get to those.
I'm happy to share whatever, but first day, the task was, okay, we need you to build a website for this new company. And, I think a lot of people at the time, and even now, they don't really understand what you learn and what you don't learn in a degree in computer science. You certainly don't learn how to build a website. Nowadays, you might learn a few more of the building blocks, but even now, not so much. And back then, it was all theory. Like you had done a lot of writing code, but you had not built a website. So, I'm like, okay, I've never done that, but I guess we'll figure it out. So there's a lot of just, trial and error, figuring things out, search engines. The internet was not the resource that it is today by any means, but there was a lot of stuff that you could glean. But anyway, so started out as, developer. As the company grew, I was team lead, I was, a manager, I was senior developer, a bunch of different things. At one point, I was leading all of our development department, about 300 people. That was that was an interesting time. I experienced a lot of growth personally through that. I did not enjoy it though as much. Like it was not very fulfilling. It's a lot of as a company gets bigger, there's just a lot of stressors and things you have to deal with that I don't find as nearly as invigorating as kind of that startup culture we were describing. But it was great. Like all that to say, yeah, there was a ton of different experiences and roles that I got to play throughout my journey at Clearwater. Some of that including advising. A lot of it in the later years was advising other teams, advising other departments, talking with other companies to determine best practices and how we continue to grow Clearwater, things like that.
Yeah.
When I left, I didn't set out to be an advisor necessarily. It was really born out of that desire to be involved with the part of my experience with Clearwater that I loved so much, which was that early growth phase and helping a team do something impressive with limited resources.
Well, that's great. So kind of talk about what you do on a daily basis. Like what was the work that you put in today? What did that look like?
Well, I have kind of an interesting dichotomy happening right now because I told you a little bit about the Sherpa Technology Advisors, but I'm probably spending more time on the business that I purchased recently right now. So if I was to go through my day today, a lot more of those line items would show up on the business side that I and that's fun, and that's allowed me to scratch an itch that I also kind of have, which is I haven't done a lot of starting companies. Clearwater is really my only experience being closely involved in that. But I've always wanted to. I've liked that idea of having something that you control and own and grow, and all the problem solving that comes along with that. So that was largely the calculus for purchasing this business. And what it provides me personally that I enjoy is, day to day, I have to help, figure out how to make, everything work and how to solve certain problems that come up. And I really enjoy that problem solving. That problem solving, again, with the short feedback loop so that I can see, hey, as we solve this, I can see my contributions having an impact on the bottom line. That's really compelling for me.
Yeah, you just start kind of seeing results just kind of after another, and it's not huge things, but it's the little wins that you kind of get to go, okay, yeah, that's check mark, that's done, we're moving on to the next thing. I think that's a cool thing,
right? The nice thing, you asked, what does my day look like? The nice thing is, there's things you have to take care of if you own a business, or even if you have a company like Sherpa where you're advising. Like there's going to be times where people need things from you, et cetera, but you have a lot of flexibility. One of the great things of these two ventures that I'm involved with is I can largely choose where I focus my time. On the business owner side, it's usually, identifying the most pressing needs and where I can make the most impact, and, where are the most urgent things and where are the most worthwhile things to spend time on. The advising is kind of the same thing, but it's, where are people needing the most help and what opportunities are coming my way in that arena. So it's nice to have that ability to kind of pick and choose where you spend your time and focus your effort. That's what I think everyone wants in their career, ideally, right? Like a job where they can focus their time on the things they feel most valuable and where they can contribute the most.
Yeah, I think a lot of people look for that, and I think that's something that kind of you start to crave a little bit. At least that's my personality, and what I've seen is kind of going through, and you're like, what if I was an owner? What if I had my business and was kind of going through it? Like, yeah, it's a lot of work. Don't get me wrong. Like even just starting up this podcast and whatnot, figuring out everything and getting everything up and going. But it's like you said, like taking those little wins and seeing that instant feedback loop. that just happens. I think it's just super rewarding to just see that kind of progress.
Absolutely.
So in your advising and with, this new business venture of yours, the people that you work with, what are some of the traits that stand out to you?
In others that I work with,
Yeah.
um, so I read a lot of there's a guy named Paul Graham that started Y Combinator, which I'm not sure if you're familiar, but it's they call it a startup incubator, but it's kind of a early stage. It's not venture capital, but they basically assist and help startups, and we'll invest some money. But he started this. It's huge now, Y Combinator, a number of years ago. But I read a lot of his stuff, and one thing he describes, he writes a lot of essays, and he wrote one on what makes a good startup founder. And he described the quality that he thought was most important as being relentlessly resourceful, I think is the phrase. I might have that slightly wrong, but relentlessly resourceful. And I've grown to really appreciate that. Again, talking about growing a company or even any kind of project or starting something from scratch, you're always going to encounter roadblocks and hurdles. And I think those individuals that can develop or have that ability to be relentlessly resourceful, meaning, I'm going to figure out a way to get through this problem and I'll keep at it until I figure that out. That allows people to be the most successful I've seen. So the most impressive people that I've had a chance to work with, a lot of them seem to have that quality. So
and they're super adaptive. And I think especially like in startups, like as we've been saying, with people who can kind of go, oh, that's the problem. Let me see what I can figure out. You don't necessarily know everything, but you at least know how to find an answer, I guess. And so I really like that, relentlessly resourceful. I think that's a great tidbit.
Yeah, I think Paul Graham intentionally, he could have just said resourceful or he could have just said relentless, but I think there are two parts, because it's not just, there are some people that have a lot of willpower and might just be willing to beat their head against the wall and refuse to give up. But that by itself isn't enough to solve the problems. You also need the resourcefulness piece, to be creative, adaptive, patient, persistent, and try new things. And like you said, figure out how to find answers. But you have to do that relentlessly. So you need both parts. I've met people with one or the other, with one of those without the other, and you need both to really have that level of success that you need in any kind of new initiative, startup, project, or career. Really, it helps anyone in those situations.
Yeah. What would be your kind of best advice for someone looking at advising or kind of in the tech world, for them to kind of get into it? What skills should they start to pick up? What traits should they have besides being relentlessly resourceful, like we just talked about? But what do you think is the most important thing for them to know?
Well, I think it's hard to advise anyone on anything if you haven't experienced it yourself. So advising is maybe a hard one, because I think you really have to live that life and do those things to then build up some expertise that could be helpful to somebody else. So that's maybe a special category, but I think if we're talking software, that was my background. That's what my profession was in. What I would tell people a lot was, obviously you want to hone your craft. You want to get really good at programming. The other thing that was less obvious to people, though, is I'd always say, don't hesitate to really jump into the domain you find yourself and become an expert. So you can be a software developer, and that's very fungible from one company to the next, right? Like I can learn Python at one company, and a lot of those skills I could take with me to the next. But whenever you're working at a company, there's a certain domain that's specific to that company that's not going to be as fungible. And sometimes that would cause, software developers to shy away from it. For example, at Clearwater, we were all about financial reporting and accounting. And so there was a lot of opportunity and almost necessity to really understand how that worked. And you'd see some developers shy away from it. They'd want, a product expert to answer a lot of those questions and be the knowledgeable person in the room to tell them how things should work. The developers that really jumped in and understood that, it took an investment, but took the time to really become an expert. They were the most valuable ones to the company because they had paired up both the development programming expertise with the domain expertise that the company needed. So I would encourage people, that's one example in one profession. You could apply the same to any other role or profession or company, but I would encourage people to really become an expert in the domain you find yourself. Even if you're like, I don't even plan to be in this domain for the next 10 years or my whole career, or I don't even know if I'll be here in 2 years. Regardless, I would say it's always worth trying to become, to a certain extent, a domain expert. Don't try to offload that to other people. Jump in yourself and really become a domain expert. I think it opens a lot of other opportunities and makes you more valuable.
No, I think that's great. I think to really sink your teeth into it, be resourceful and be useful wherever you are. And it'll, it may not transfer over exactly, but that kind of skill of learning and becoming that expert, I think is invaluable.
Yeah. And you remind me of another one, Colton, which is, learning how to learn. With my own kids and the rising generation, I think a lot of times, finding answers to questions yourself. I mean, there's never been a time in the history of the world with more resources at our fingertips to answer questions. And I think probably because of that, it tends to make us lazier and often not take advantage of those and answer things and learn things for ourselves. That would be the other big thing, is get really good at learning, developing a curiosity, I guess, first of all, but then learning things on your own and finding answers to questions on your own. That's a huge asset in any profession.
Well, Jerek, this has been awesome to have you on the show and to have you kind of share your story, your expertise, and your advice for kind of up and coming people, maybe looking to change careers or looking to kind of start their first one. I really appreciate having on. But before I let you go, I always love to ask some of your funniest stories kind of over your career path, something you look back at and you just kind of laugh at yourself or maybe the situation that you were in. Anything you'd like to share?
Yeah, I'll share one from my early Clearwater days. I'll try to keep it brief, but this was early days. Anyone that's been part of a startup knows you're kind of flying by the seat of your pants most days and just trying to keep things together. We just rolled out a version of our software, and we had a few clients on the system at this point. And one of our biggest ones I had been working with closely, and our login system was admittedly pretty cheesy at the time. But this was, 2002, so I'll use that as an excuse. But
the good old days.
Yeah, the good old days. But anyway, we had clients logging in and using our systems, and that was huge. I had made some changes, and another terrible practice that anyone that knows anything about software would never do this, but we made a lot of changes in our production environment back then. We'd test them out, but it was not, especially on the database side, which is like the worst place to be doing that. And I had made some changes that, unbeknownst to me, had wiped out some user login information, such that the next time they tried to log in, their password would be invalid. So I'm trying to figure out, we had quite a few users at that point. So I'm like, shoot, how do we, I'm asking our IT guy, hey, let's reapply the latest backup. Of course, we tried to do that and it failed. I can't remember if we didn't have the latest version or whatever. So that didn't work, of course.
Control Z.
So I'm sitting there like, oh man, shoot. And our biggest client calls up and asks, hey, I'm having trouble logging in. And at this point, I was the only one on the team really that had figured this out. Like this call happened as I'm realizing, hey, I think I wiped out this user login. So I take the call, and this lady's like, hey, and I'm bracing for the worst. Like I'm going to have to admit that, yeah, we messed up. She says, hey, Jerek, I'm embarrassed to say this, but for the life of me, I cannot remember my password. And I said, you know what? I can't remember her name. I said, say it with Susan. I'm like, Susan, don't worry about it. We can reset your password and you'll be back up and running. No problem. So we did that. And as far as I know, I don't think everyone was ever wiser. We eventually figured out how to get the database backed up, and no one ever knew that I had temporarily wiped out everyone's login.
Oh, man.
A lot of lessons learned that day, what not to do.
Oh, I'm sure. But I'm sure as you're like working on it, because I've been kind of not that same situation, but you're like, crap, I kind of messed that up. And your kind of heart starts beating. You're like, how am I going to fix this? How's this going to go over? That's awesome.
Yeah, that was the day where I really learned why it is a bad idea to make changes directly to production. It's convenient. Yeah, it's convenient, but sure, not ever a good idea.
So there you have it, guys. I hope you enjoyed this week's episode with Jerek. Hope you're able to take something away and apply it to your own life or maybe even your own career. If you did like this episode, make sure to leave a 5-star review or make sure to like and subscribe and comment if you happen to be watching on YouTube. Until next time, I'll catch you guys later. See ya.